Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another in-between episode. Today I am doing a big tasting episode with three different Xiaguan teas. These are all 2005 8653s. A little bit about my own history. I've told the story a handful of times on TeaDB, but in case you're tuning in or don't recall it, my original experience with MXT as well as with Xiaguan was to order their cheapest 2005 8653 AT that was non-iron, and which I quickly decided I did not care for, and it ended up in my compost bin. That would have been 6 or 7 years ago at this point. So I had a very, very negative experience with my initial one, and my takeaway, and its takeaway I still hold to this date, is to not necessarily buy the cheapest thing you can for Xiaguan. I think there's a level of consistency for dye productions, as far as like some of the lesser batches of like 7542, that is still pretty good, especially when you compare it with something like Xiaguan. I've had less of these types of experiences with dye, and I've had certainly my fair share of Monghai Tea Factory tea. And I've had a number of experiences actually with 2005 8653 throughout the years. I eventually talked to Toby, who is a big Xiaguan Crane Gang guy, knows a lot of the productions. And so one tea that I've always liked is the Iron Cake 8653 January. Of course, this is a much more pricey production than that really cheap 8653 I bought. So I kind of have had experiences at the very low end and the high end of 2005 8653. And the January version is actually one that we brought on a previous episode of just normal TeaDB. That one was from Emilio. You can find the January version floating around in a number of different places. I have, I think, about 5 cakes, all of which I bought from MXT. But you can find it from, I think, Jade Leaf, King Timol. I think Teas We Like may have stuff at some point. So it's not a uncommon or difficult production to necessarily find there. So the other two are going to be, were kindly sent to me by Phobos. So thank you, Phobos. I think they're both from MXT. So this is the 2005 Not Iron. And this is the 2005 Thin Paper 8653. And we were just looking up ahead of time. It is the September batch, and it has more of a light print on the wrapper. And apparently there are differences even amongst those. And so even though we're comparing 3 different versions, this is by no means sort of a big deep dive into 2005 8653, because there are much more and they could differ. I was just poking around MXT before we did this. The January version is not on there, but there's a March thick paper. So this is the thick paper January. So thick paper January versus thick paper March. I don't know what the difference is. That one is selling for about $75 to $80 on there. And there is a thin paper 8653 iron from September. So the same one as this, that is selling currently for around $50 there. So still, again, there is quite a range of teas there. And we're going to see here how much variation there is amongst this one 8653 recipe. So before we get into that, a little bit just on 8653, it's probably the most classic of the Xiaguan recipes, somewhat equivalent to their 7542, even if it's not as consistent, as I talked about. So it's sort of a middle leaf grade production generally. It's quite different than what I would say are the other benchmark teas for Xiaguan. So they're Tuol chas that they're known for, which tend to be a much tippier affair. And it's definitely one that I recommend people seek out and sort of get a benchmark on. The issue is that it's hard to get a benchmark on it when it's as inconsistent as this. So let's dive into these teas and let's see what I think of them. Okay, so I did steep 1 earlier, just a little bit before starting this episode. This is steep number 2. Here we are looking at the non-iron, and this is the January iron. So these two on the sides, the non-iron as well as the 8653, the thin paper, were MXT, as what this middle one is actually, I believe, Taiwanese stored. So a little bit of difference, but hopefully roughly comparable as far as storage goes. So yeah, some Guangzhou stored ones on the left and the right, and or at least presumably Guangzhou. And the middle would be Taiwan. Brewing on these is a little bit tricky, using the same leaf to water ratio, of course, about 4.2 grams per 70 milliliters. But these iron cakes are going to just come apart a little bit differently. So I try to break it up pretty well before starting, but of course you're never going to be 100% on those. So brewing wise, I am going to lean a little bit more heavily on the 2 iron cakes, at least to start out with, as those come apart. So here we have that one, which is the non-iron, and I'm going to make a steep of the thin paper now. And then we will take a quick smell of these. All right. So, you know, I think there are some coloration differences. It seems like the non-iron is brewing the darkest, but kind of roughly comparable. Okay, so let's take a smell. Non-iron. Kind of get a hint of citrus there, but pretty heavy woodiness. The citrus, I'd say, is pretty unusual for these sorts of teas. The thick paper, probably the weakest aroma, pretty much just emitting a sort of kind of big rounded woody vibes. A little bit more incense here on the thin paper. Jeez, this is quite an episode. We got thick, thin, and non-iron. A little bit richer aroma on that. Things like the aromatics probably attribute a lot of that to just the storage of the tea beforehand. So yeah, just something more to note rather than, I think, an inherent difference in the tea quality of those. So here we go, non-iron. This definitely has not what I would call smoke, but some of that very retired smoke. So more hinting at a past smokiness. A little bit of barbecue notes to it. There's a little bit of sweetness, but it's packed in with this sort of like heavy resin feel to it. See how that sits for just a second. Yeah, so the aftertaste of this is not as great. I really can feel it sort of in my my cheeks there, just sort of flushing them. Quite strong tea. Today is a day where I will be getting a fair amount of caffeine on camera. Yeah, for me at least, one flaw of that one would be I would like that aftertaste to become a little bit faster and a little bit sweeter. It's not necessarily terrible, but I do like it when sort of these teas reward you with probably a stronger sweet aftertaste in them. So January, here we go. January thick. It's more mild, but it's also thicker. Definitely a better balance to it, a better sweetness as well. Yeah, sort of in that menthol camphor range. More menthol to this than that first one we did. Really nice sweetness to it, a good thickness to it as well. There's a really nice just overall structure to the tea here. Okay, so we are going to the thin now. Then we'll do steep number 3 in reverse order. Cheers. A little more texture to this. And it also, similar to the first one, has a little bit more of that barbecue texture as a barbecue past retired smoke taste to it. I do think this is considerably better than the non-iron. Getting some Xiaguan burps right now. This also has a bit of that resin to it, resin menthol to it. that is somewhat similar to the January thick. Yeah, nice sweetness to this too. It's a little bit thinner, I would say, than the January thick. So as far as odor preference so far, I would say that the non-iron is definitely at the bottom. Thick paper and thin are much closer as far as quality goes, but right now, the thick paper, while it might be the simplest brew, I think I enjoy it the most, as it has most, I think just the overall structure of the tea, while it tastes fairly simple, it gives good body and it has a good aftertaste to it. Or a good, good sweetness quality to it as well. So a little bit hard to decipher exact aftertaste when you're doing side by side like this. But I will say that the second two teas both leave a pleasant feeling on the mouth compared to the first one. Okay, so we are going to go in reverse order this time. So steeping the thin paper from September. So the leaves are definitely starting to come apart for both of our iron cakes. Smells a little smoky, and just like a light sort of retired smoke, I guess I would say. Yeah. So one nice thing about these, this range also is that the price for all of these, in my opinion, is still quite affordable. Even the thick paper iron, which is this middle one, which is the most expensive one, still relatively affordable. You can find it for around $100, maybe a little bit more, depending on where you go. Okay, so getting a little bit of a darker color from the thin paper. Again, I would attribute that more to probably storage and the past history of the tea rather than necessarily a fundamental difference in the leaf quality. Okay, so pull these around and go to our non-iron, which definitely is looking the most unraveled at this point. Okay, so really quite a red color there. So I might be doing this tea a slight disservice by pushing it to this level if I'm put off by that aftertaste. So let's take a smell of these latter two. Sweet menthol, woody notes to that. Pretty simple aroma. You know, interestingly, this non-iron probably has the most complex stuff going on in the aroma. Fairly complex hints of wood and stuff like that. Interesting. I can't even necessarily pinpoint that. Quite an interesting smell coming from it, though. Cheers. There's definitely a thinner body to this, but it also has a nice texture in a way. It's like almost slick in the mouth in comparison. Heavy resinous quality to this steep as well. A little bit of that pine wood profile. And these teas definitely getting me pretty heated and caffeinated. 75 degrees in here, 53 RH, so feeling it, feeling that sweat. Cheers. So definitely the thickest body of them. Yeah. For me, I think in terms of conventional tea, what qualities, I think definitely the thick paper has beaten the thin pretty solidly at this point, even if the thin has a couple interesting things going in it, specifically in terms of texture. yeah, some almost some berry fruit notes to it to go along with that. Yeah, one interesting thing I also wanted to note is that none of these teas are particularly smoky. A couple of them, particularly the non-iron, but also the September iron, hint at smoke from the past, but I would say neither are smoky at this point. So again, this tea is also a little bit thinner in texture than the thick. I think one thing that's really emphasized in comparing these is that the structure of the thick is just much bigger and better. It has more just body and I don't know. It just feels like you're drinking something of more substance. In fact, this tea really suffers. To me, this tastes right now of just flavors and not much else as far as either texture that you're getting from the September or other stuff. Interestingly, when I had this a couple days ago, it did taste a fair bit more interesting, and I thought not bad. And I still think it's probably not bad, but with the differences being really especially emphasized during this session, I think by no means is it a match for either of the iron cakes here. Okay, so we're going to do one last steep of these before I sort of dissolve into a hot, sweaty mess. I'll probably be drinking these throughout the rest of the day. If there's anything interesting, as I did for the Jiaji comparison, I'll come back and report on that. So I think we're hitting sort of like the peak flavor steeps for some of these. As soon as I pour water on that, it definitely looks ready. So getting a real nice red brew. Interestingly, this middle one now, which has been so far, I thought one of the ones that hinted at smoke the least, now has a bit of that sort of barbecue smoke going on with it as well. So that was the non-iron that I just poured into there. So if you've had any of these teas, or if you tried 2005 8653, let me know what your thoughts are. I'd certainly be curious to hear people's experiences. This is one of those teas where you really got to judge it on a sort of a case-by-case basis. Storage really does matter for these teas, and I definitely am someone that subscribes to the school that Guangzhou, Malaysia, Taiwan treat these teas much better than something like Kunming or whatever, just because they tend to age it quite a bit more. These teas, even the non-iron version, are very, very compressed. So I think if you were to age this, I would not drink this tea if this tea, even though I think the base material can be decent, but I would not drink this tea if this tea was stored in Seattle for 16 years. Or I would try it out of morbid curiosity, but I would have very low hopes. Cheers. Interesting. Not bad. Sort of woody, almost hints at some like vanilla, creamy texture. Flavors to this. The body, when you have it sort of back to back with itself rather than with these other teas, isn't as glaring of a flaw. Yeah. Let's see. Again, one of the first complaints I had with this tea is the aftertaste, and the way it lingers in the mouth is not as obviously good as the other teas. So we're going to sit with that for just a second. If you remember back to the Jaji comparison, the 2005, and the reason why I preferred the 2004 to it is because it also sort of left a little bit more of that acrid taste, which I don't think anyone would actually be a fan of in the mouth. And yeah, the sweetness is not coming very fast, so don't love that as far as this non-iron goes. Cheers. Yeah. Much better, but much sweeter. Sort of a menthol, retired smoke, barbecue taste to this. Sort of cycling through very similar flavors on all three. They certainly all taste like Xiaguan. I guess I'm developing more experience with just sort of like iron 8653. I think I could probably peg these both as 8653. I don't know that I would easily do it for the non-iron version. These two in particular have a lot of that menthol wood combination that I do tend to like in Xiaguan, and to me, I very much associate it with the brand. Yeah, nice rounded. This tea also is considerably less sharp than both of the other teas, particularly the non-iron. Okay, so let's wrap up this session here. Less sweet than the thick paper, but you can feel more of that sweetness come a little bit after. Okay, so yeah, I think that just about wraps up this episode. I am certainly feeling the tea. That was about 9 steeps in a pretty short amount of time. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Let me know your experiences with 8653. Yeah, and I will see you all next time. Cheers. Actually, real quickly, gonna assign some ratings to this. If I change my mind later, I'll do an addendum on them. But non-iron, 5.7. Thick January, I think a 6.6. I could see myself even going up from that at some point. And the thin September, gonna give it a 6. So I'd say that this one, when I previously tried it, I thought it was drinkable. Now I'm not so sure. This is definitely a good tea. I recommend it. I think it will age well, and I think I enjoy it well enough now. And this one I think is acceptable. It's certainly drinkable now. It's certainly drinkable, and it's not bad. But I do think it's a little bit worse than the thick paper. Thank you all. That's a Xiaguan burp right there. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you all next time.